The breaking point was a rainy morning in Mountain View when Sundar walked into the office. The glass walls of the Google headquarters glistened with drops of water, and the air felt unusually heavy. Sundar always arrived early, before most of his team, to gather his thoughts and prepare for the endless stream of meetings. But that day there was something different in his step, something slower, almost reluctant. As he entered his office and closed the door, he let out a breath. He didn't even know he was holding. For weeks he had felt it building, the weight of expectations, the constant pressure to perform, to inspire, to decide. But today it felt unbearable. He sat at his desk, staring at his reflection in the dark screen of his laptop. He saw a man who was tired, not just physically, but in his heart. The kindness in his eyes was still there, but it was dimmed by exhaustion. He whispered to himself, "I can't keep doing this." The morning passed in a blur of meetings, reports, presentations, strategies. Words were spoken, but none of them seemed to reach him. Every smile felt forced, every nod mechanical. His team noticed something was off. He was usually the calmest person in the room, always listening, always encouraging. But today he seemed distant, distracted, even sad. By the time the big meeting came around in the afternoon, the clouds outside had grown darker. The room was full. Engineers, designers, managers, everyone waiting for his words. The atmosphere was tense because everyone could feel something was about to happen. Sundar stood at the front of the room. He looked around at the faces, so many young, hopeful faces looking up to him. They expected him to say something visionary, to set the tone for the next quarter. But instead, he stood silently for a long moment. The only sound was the faint tapping of rain against the windows. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, but steady. "I can't do this anymore," he said. The room went silent. People froze, unsure if they heard him right. He took another breath and continued. "For years, I've tried to carry everything on my shoulders. Every decision, every failure, every success. But I'm just one person. And today, I don't know if I have the strength anymore." Whispers started in the back of the room. People exchanged confused looks. Some were shocked. Some looked worried. Then he added, "I know this might come as a surprise to you, but I've been feeling this way for a long time, and I can't pretend anymore." Someone in the front row spoke, trying to reassure him. "You're the best leader we could ask for. We're here for you." But Sundar just shook his head, a faint, sad smile on his face. "You don't understand. This isn't just about me being tired. It's about losing something inside, something that used to make me love this work." As he spoke, memories flashed in his mind. The boy who grew up in a modest home in India, fascinated by technology, dreaming of changing the world. The young engineer who worked late nights because he loved building things. The leader who always believed in people and wanted to help them grow. But now, he felt like a stranger to that boy. He looked back at his team and said, "I need to tell you a story. My story. Maybe then you'll understand." And so he began. He spoke of his childhood, how his father saved for months just to buy a rotary phone, how he would watch the technicians fix it and ask them questions, how he studied under the dim light of a kerosene lamp because the power would go out in the evenings, how his mother cooked on a single stove and they all ate together on the floor. "Those days were hard," he said, "but they were also simple. I felt alive." He told them about arriving in the United States with almost nothing. The cold air, the strange accents, the loneliness, and yet the kindness of strangers, the thrill of discovery, the belief that anything was possible. "When I joined Google," he said, "I wasn't the smartest person here. Not even close. But I worked hard. And I believed in something bigger than myself." He paused then, his eyes glistening as he looked around the room. But somewhere along the way, he continued. Something changed. I became so focused on goals, numbers, results. I forgot why I started. I stopped seeing people. I stopped seeing myself. A young woman near the back raised her hand timidly and asked, "But what will you do now?" He looked at her, and for the first time that day, A faint spark returned to his eyes. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I know I need to find that boy again, the boy who believed. The room was quiet. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others looked down at their hands, lost in thought about then, without warning. One of his senior engineers stood up. You don't have to do this alone, he said firmly. We're a team. If you've lost something, we'll help you find it, just like you've helped all of us. Sundar looked at him, surprised that another person stood up. We believe in you, she said. Then another, and another, until half the room was standing. Sundar felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't realized how much these people cared, not just about the work, but about him as a person. But just as hope began to stir in his chest, something unexpected happened. A loud knock on the door interrupted the moment. Everyone turned. To look. Standing there was a man none of them recognized, tall in a dark suit, holding a sealed envelope. The man stepped inside, handed the envelope to Sundar, and left without a word. Sundar opened it slowly. As he read the first few lines, his face went pale. He looked up at the room, his hands trembling. I have to go, he said quietly. Before anyone could ask what was wrong, he walked out of the room, the envelope still clutched in his hand. Outside. The rain was falling harder now, drenching the pavement. He walked quickly, almost running as though trying to escape something. Behind him, his team stood frozen, staring at the door he had just disappeared through. What was in the envelope? What could have shaken him so deeply? Nobody knew. And in that moment, everyone felt the same chill run through them, a sense that something bigger, something much darker, had just begun. The enveloped rain outside had become a relentless curtain, a steady drumbeat against the glass walls of the building. Sundar stepped out into it without an umbrella, not even noticing how quickly his shirt clung to his skin and his shoes filled with water. His thoughts were a tangled storm that matched the one above him, his mind spinning around the words he had just read. Inside the envelope, written in plain, cold ink on a single sheet of paper, was a message that felt like a blade slicing through. Everything he thought he knew, no greeting, no explanation. Just one sentence that made his stomach drop. You have 24 hours to make the choice, or the truth comes out. There was no signature, no clue who it came from, only a small symbol. At the bottom, a faint, almost invisible circle with a line through it. He stared at it for a long time, his fingers trembling as he turned the paper over and over, hoping to find something else, anything that would make sense of it. But there was nothing. He kept walking through the rain, past the parking lot, past the rows of trees that lined the path to a quieter part of the campus. He stopped finally near a small garden, a place he often came to when he needed to think, and sat down on a wet bench. The cold of the stone seeped through his clothes, but he didn't care. His mind drifted back to the meeting, to the faces of his team as they stood up for him. Their kindness, their respect, it had touched him more deeply than he could say. And yet, now all of it felt so far away, like a dream already fading. Because the words in the envelope had reminded him of something he'd buried long ago, something he thought would never resurface. He closed his eyes and leaned back against the bench, feeling the weight of the years pressing down on him. He thought of his father working late nights at the electrical factory so Sundar could stay. In school, of his mother always encouraging him, even when the bills piled up. Of the little boy he used to be, barefoot on the hot streets of Chennai, chasing kites with his friends and believing that the world was a good place. He whispered to himself, barely audible over the rain, "What have I done?" But even as the question left his lips, he didn't yet know what the answer would be. All he knew was that someone, somewhere, knew about his past, about the one choice he had made years ago that he never wanted anyone to find out. And now they were threatening to expose it. Behind him, footsteps approached. He stiffened, instinctively folding the paper and sliding it into his pocket. A familiar voice called his name, Sundar. He turned and saw Anita, one of his oldest colleagues, standing there with an umbrella. She looked worried, her brow furrowed as she took in his drenched figure. You disappeared from the meeting, she said gently. What happened? Are you okay? He tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. I just needed some air, he said. She didn't look convinced. She moved closer and held the umbrella over him, shielding him from the rain. You know you can talk to me, right? Whatever it is, we can figure it out together. He wanted to believe her. He really did. But how could he tell her? How could he tell anyone? The secret he carried wasn't just his own. It could ruin more lives than just his. Thank you, he said finally, standing up. But I just need some time alone right now. She hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but finally nodded and walked away, leaving him there under the storm. Once she was gone, he pulled the paper out again, staring at that symbol at the bottom, the circle with the line through it. It looked familiar somehow, but he couldn't place it. He tried to think back, meetings, emails, old documents, but nothing came to him. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his home office, staring at the envelope under the dim light of his desk lamp. At one point, he opened his laptop and began searching for the symbol online. Nothing useful came up. Only vague references to old secret societies and defunct companies. By morning, he felt more exhausted than ever. But as the sun began to rise, he made a decision. He couldn't ignore it. He couldn't run away. If someone was threatening him, he had to find out who and why. So he got dressed, left the house early, and drove back to the office. This time he didn't take the main entrance. Instead, he went through a side door and made his way to the lower levels of the building, to a rarely used archive room where old contracts and files were kept. As he unlocked the door and stepped inside, the smell of paper and dust hit him. Rows and rows of shelves stretched before him, full of boxes and binders. He began searching, pulling out files at random, scanning them for the symbol. Hour after hour passed. His hands grew dirty with dust. His eyes ached from reading. But he found nothing until, in the back corner of the room, behind a loose panel in the wall, he noticed a thin, black folder wedged into the gap. He pulled it out carefully, his heart pounding. On the cover was the same symbol, the circle with the line through it, embossed faintly in silver. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside were photographs. Grainy, black and white pictures of him as a young man, at his first job interview, at his graduation, at the airport when he first arrived in the United States. But there were also other photos, ones he didn't recognize at first, of other people, strangers, standing near him, watching him. In the background of some photos, he saw the faint outline of the symbol painted on walls, etched into glass, hidden in plain sight. And then there was the final page. A list of names. His name was at the top, followed by others he didn't know. And next to each name, a date and a word. Decision. He stared at his name. The date written next to it was today. His breath caught in his throat. His pulse raced. Whoever. They had been watching him for years, and now it was his turn to make some kind of choice. But what choice? What did they want from him? Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. He froze, listening. Footsteps approached from the hallway outside, slow and deliberate. He quickly shoved the folder into his bag, turned off the lights, and pressed himself into the shadows between two shelves. The door creaked open. A figure, the same man in the dark suit who had delivered the envelope yesterday. He paused in the doorway, scanning the room. You shouldn't have come here, the man said softly, his voice echoing in the silence. Sundar didn't move. He held his breath, waiting. The man stepped further inside, his shoes clicking on concrete floor. He stopped just a few feet away, his back to Sundar, and spoke again. You still have time, he said, but not much. We'll speak again soon. Then, without turning around, the man walked out, closing the door behind him. Sundar exhaled shakily, his body trembling. He waited several minutes before finally emerging from his hiding place. He clutched his bag tightly and left the archives. His mind racing. He needed answers. He needed to know who these people were, what they wanted, and what this decision was supposed to be. But deep down, He already feared the truth, that whatever this was, it had been set in motion. Long time ago, and he was only now catching up to it. As he emerged into the daylight, he saw Anita waiting outside the building. She rushed to him, her face full of concern. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "Everyone's been looking for you. Are you okay?" He forced a tired smile. I just had to check on something," he said. But as he spoke, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a single text message from an unknown number. "The clock is ticking. Tonight, rooftop, alone." He stared at the screen, his hand cold. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was only beginning. And tonight, he would have to face it, whatever it was, alone. Asterisk the rooftop. Day passed like a dream, or perhaps more like a nightmare that he could not wake from. Every minute felt heavier than the last, each sound in the office sharper, more threatening. Sundar moved through the halls, as if through water, his body there, but his mind somewhere else entirely. All day he thought about the text message on his phone, the words burning in his pocket. "The clock is ticking. Tonight, rooftop, alone." When the sun finally began to sink, painting the sky in muted reds and purples, the office started to empty. His team packed up their laptop, exchanged quiet goodbyes, and filed out one by one. Some of them glanced at him with worried eyes, still remembering the strange events of the day before. He managed faint nods in return, but he spoke to no one. When the last of them was gone, he rose from his chair, feeling the cold weight of the black folder still in his bag. He walked to the elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. As the doors slid shut, he caught a glimpse of his own reflection in the polished metal, a man who looked older than yesterday, with shadows under his eyes and a faint tremor. In his hands, the elevator climbed slowly, each floor passing with a soft chime. He could hear his own heartbeat over the hum of the machinery, steady but hard, like a drum echoing in an empty hall. When the doors opened at last, he stepped out into a silent corridor. It was lined with windows that showed the city below. Glittering lights stretching into the dark horizon. At the end of the hallway stood a single metal door, marked rooftop access. He hesitated before reaching for the handle. For a moment, he thought about turning back, about going home, pretending none of this had happened, letting the secret stay buried. But he knew that was no longer possible. Someone had found him, and they were waiting. The air on the rooftop was sharp and cold. The wind whipped at his clothes, carrying with it the smell of rain still clinging to the concrete. He stepped out slowly, scanning the space. The roof was wide, edged by a low wall and dotted with mechanical equipment, fans, vents, antennae. At first, it seemed empty. But then he saw him. The man in a dark suit stood near the far corner, his hands folded behind his back. Even from here, Sundar could feel the weight of his presence. There was something about him, calm, deliberate, almost inhuman in his stillness. As Sundar approached, the man turned his head slightly but did not speak. His eyes, when they met Sundar's, were dark and unreadable. "You came," the man said at last, his voice low and measured. "I didn't feel like I had a choice," Sundar replied, his own voice barely louder than the wind. The man gave a small, cold smile. "There is always a choice. That is precisely why you are here." Sundar reached into his bag and pulled out the black folder, holding it up. "What is this? Who are you? What do you want from me?" The man studied him for a long moment, then gestured for him to set the folder down on a nearby vent. Sundar hesitated, but obeyed. "That," the man said, nodding toward the folder, "is a record of your life. A very careful record. Every decision you have made since the day you first walked into this company. Every moment you thought you were alone. Every time you believed no one was watching. We were." Sundar felt his stomach turn. "Why?" he asked. The man stepped closer, his shoes making no sound on the concrete. "Because you were chosen many years ago. You just didn't know it." Sundar shook his head. "Chosen for what?" The man's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. To decide, he said simply. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small device, a black box no larger than a deck of cards. He held it out to Sundar. Tonight you will decide whether to press this button or not, the man said. Sundar stared at it but did not take it. What does it do? That, the man said, is the right question, but the wrong time to ask it. All you need to know is this. Pressing the button will end something. Not pressing it will allow something else to begin. Both come at a cost. You cannot avoid the cost. Sundar looked down at the box. His fingers itched to take it, if only to feel its weight and understand it better. But something in him resisted. What if I refuse? He asked finally. The man tilted his head slightly, as if amused. Refusal is a choice, he said. But, like all choices, it has consequences. The only thing you cannot do is nothing. Even doing nothing is a choice. The wind picked up then, tugging at Sundar's jacket, carrying the faint sound of traffic far below. He thought of his team, of Anita, of the young engineer who had stood up for him in the meeting, of all the people who believed in him. He thought of his family, of his parents back in India who had sacrificed everything for him to come here. Asterisk. Why me? He asked, his voice almost breaking. I didn't ask for this. I don't even know what this is. The man's expression softened slightly, though his eyes stayed hard. Because you are already making this choice every day, he said. Every decision you make changes lives, more lives than you know. Tonight is no different. It is simply clearer. Sundar looked up at him, then really looked at him. The man seemed older now, the lines in his face deeper, the weariness in his eyes more visible. For a moment, Sundar thought he saw something like sadness there. Asterisk. What happens after I choose? Sundar asked quietly. That, the man said, is up to you. He placed the box on the vent beside the folder, then stepped back. You have until midnight. When the clock strikes 12, the choice is made one way or another. Then, without another word, the man turned and walked away. Disappearing into the shadows at the edge of the roof, Sundar stood there for a long time, staring at the box. He reached out and touched it. It was heavier. Then it looked, and warm, as if it had been waiting for him. He picked it up and held it in both hands, turning it over. There was only one button on the surface, red and unmarked. No instructions, no clues. Just that quiet, waiting presence. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine what pressing it would mean. What ending would it bring? What beginning would it prevent? And what if he did nothing? He thought about the folder again. The pictures, the list of names, the word decision written next to his own. He thought about the strangers in the photographs, watching him from the edges of his life. He thought about the quiet moments when he felt like someone was behind him, just out of sight. He opened his eyes and looked at the horizon. The last of the sun had vanished now, leaving the world painted in black and silver. The lights of the city twinkled below, like distant stars behind him. The clock in the hallway began to chime 11. He had 1 hour left. The wind howled, louder now, as if urging him to act. But his hands remained still. He stared down at the button, his reflection. Faint in its surface, and then faint, but unmistakable. He heard something. A soft sound, like a whisper, carried on the wind. It came from behind him. Near the door where the man had disappeared. He turned. His heart hammering there. Standing in the shadows was another figure. Smaller, cloaked, face hidden. And from the darkness, a voice. Not the man's, but someone else's. Don't press it. The voice said. Sundar froze. Don't press it, the voice repeated, firmer now. They lied to you. He stared into the darkness, trying to make out the figure. But it stayed hidden, only the faint glint of eyes visible. Who are you? He demanded, but the figure only shook its head and stepped back, melting into the shadows. Sundar stood there, breathless, clutching the box. The wind whipped around him, and the city lights seemed to pulse below, like a heartbeat. The clock struck 11:15. The box grew heavier in his hands, and Now he had more questions than ever, and no answers. The button glowed faintly in. The dark, waiting, asterisk, the shadows speak rooftop was quieter now, though the wind still moved in restless gusts, rattling loose bits of metal and making the city lights shimmer below. Sundar stood frozen where the figure had vanished moments ago, still clutching the box in his hands. The words lingered in his ears. Don't press it. They lied to you. His heart pounded and his breath came in short bursts. He turned his head slowly, scanning the shadows along the edges of the rooftop, hoping to catch another glimpse of the figure who had spoken. But there was nothing. No sound of footsteps. No rustle of fabric. Only the steady drone of the city below and the faint ticking of the clock behind him, marking every second that slipped through his fingers. He took a cautious step toward the spot where the figure had stood. The darkness there seemed thicker, as if it held its own secrets. He called out softly, "Who are you? What do you know?" His voice cracked slightly, carried away by the wind before it could reach anything. Silence. But then, so faint he almost missed it. A quiet laugh, brittle and humorless, came from the stairwell door. Sundar spun around and saw that it was slightly ajar now. Though it had been closed before. With a deep breath, he walked toward it. Each step felt heavier than the last, his shoes crunching on loose gravel scattered across the concrete. When he reached the door, he hesitated only a moment before pushing it open. The stairwell beyond was dim, lit by a single flickering bulb halfway down the wall. The air here was warmer, though it smelled faintly of dust and metal. The door shut behind him with a soft thud, cutting off the wind and plunging him into uneasy stillness. He shouldn't be here. The voice came again, closer now. Though he still couldn't see who it belonged to, he swallowed hard and said, louder this time, "Then show yourself. Tell me what you know." There was movement above him, a shadow on the landing, just one flight up. He looked up and finally saw her. A woman, cloaked in a dark coat, leaned against the railing. Her hood obscured most of her face, but a strand of hair caught the light, long, black, and wet from the rain. She stood very still, watching him with an intensity that made the hair on his neck stand up. "You've already seen enough," she said softly. "You're closer to the truth than you realize. But if you press that button, it's over. For you, and for them." "Them?" he asked, clutching the box tighter. "Who are they? Who are you?" She tilted her head slightly, as though weighing how much to tell him. Then she began to descend the stairs slowly, her boots barely making a sound. "You're not the first," she said. "You weren't supposed to find the folder. You weren't supposed to ask questions. That man in a suit, he's just a messenger. He doesn't care about you. He only cares about the choice. The button. It's a test, Sundar, but not the kind you think." Her use of his name made him stiffen. He stepped back as she reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped just a few feet from him. Now, in the faint light, he could see her eyes. Dark, sharp, and full of something he couldn't name. "How do you know my name?" he demanded. "Because," she said quietly, "once upon a time, I stood where you are now." Her words hit him like a blow. For a moment, he could only stare at her. "You," he whispered. She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the box in his hands. "I was you," she said. "I believed them. I pressed it." Sundar felt the blood drain from his face. His throat felt tight and his legs weak. What happened? He managed to ask. Her eyes flicked up to meet his again, and for the first time he saw something else in them. "Pain. Everything," she said. "And nothing. I thought I was saving something. But I was only feeding them." "Giving them what?" "They wanted." She turned away then, as though the memory was too heavy to look at him anymore. She leaned against the wall, one hand gripping the railing. "Afterward," she continued, her voice low, "you wake up and realize you've done something you can't undo. People you love disappear. Doors close. And you walk around carrying this emptiness. They make you believe you chose freely, but it was never your choice to begin with." Sundar stood there in silence, his mind reeling. He looked down at the box again, at the button that glowed faintly even here in the shadows. "What happens if I don't press it?" he asked finally. She shook her head. No one knows for sure. Some say they come for you anyway. Some say they move on to the next name on the list. But at least you don't become one of them. He thought of the list in the black folder, his name at the top, followed by others. He thought of the strangers in the photos, always watching. He thought of the man in the suit, calm and cold, telling him there was always a choice. Why? Are you telling me this? He asked quietly. She turned back to him then, pulling her hood down so he could finally see her face fully. She was younger than he expected, no older than he was, but her expression was lined with years of grief and hard lessons. Because no one warned me, she said simply. And if even one of us can get out before it's too late, maybe. It's worth something. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The stairwell was silent except for the faint hum of the flickering bulb above them died at last. She straightened, pulling her hood back up. You should go, she said. The closer it gets to midnight, the harder it will be to walk away. She started up the stairs again, her footsteps soft but sure. Sundar called after her. Wait, what's your name? She paused on the landing, her face half hidden in shadow. Names don't matter anymore, she said. But if you have to call me something, call me what I used to be. He frowned, confused. What was that? She looked back at him, and a sad smile touched her lips. Hope? She said dot, and then she was gone, disappearing into the higher levels of the stairwell, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps behind. Sundar stood there, the box in his hands, feeling its weight more keenly now. The air in the stairwell felt heavier too, as though the walls themselves were watching. He turned and pushed open the door back onto the rooftop. The wind hit him like a wave, and the lights of the city seemed brighter, harsher somehow. The clock on the wall inside struck 11:45. 15 minutes left. He walked back to the center of the rooftop and set the box down on the vent beside the black folder. He stared at it for a long time, the words of both the man and the woman echoing in his mind. There's always a choice. Don't press it. They lied to you. You can't avoid the cost. He closed his eyes and thought of his team, Anita, the engineers, the designers, all the people who had stood for him, believed in him, trusted him to lead. He thought of his family, of his parents, and the boy he used to be. He thought of everything he had built and everything he stood to lose. He opened his eyes again and looked at the button. His hand hovered above it, shaking slightly. The wind roared around him, as though urging him to decide. Just then, he heard something behind him, the sound of the stairwell door creaking open. He turned slowly, expecting to see the woman again, but it wasn't her. The man in the suit stood there now, his expression calm but with a faint edge of impatience. He stepped out onto the rooftop, his shoes clicking softly on the concrete. Time's almost up, the man said. You need to choose. Sundar straightened, his jaw tight. And if I don't? The man's lips curved into a thin, humorless smile. Then the choice is made for you. The wind howled louder, the city lights blinking below like distant stars. Sundar looked back at the button, then at the man, then at the dark stairwell where the woman had disappeared. The clock struck 11:50-9. His hand hovered over the box, and somewhere, far below in the city, a siren wailed the choice. Siren from the streets below rose and fell, like a distant wail of warning, carried upward by the cold night wind. It cut through the silence of the rooftop, a single desperate cry in the emptiness. Sundar stood still, his hand hovering over the button on the black box, his breath visible in the air. The clock above the stairwell ticked toward midnight, its second hand sweeping its final circle. The man in the suit moved closer now, his expression calm, but with something sharp in his eyes, like a blade glinting beneath the surface. He stopped only a few feet from Sundar and folded his hands behind his back. The faintest smile tugged at his lips. It is time, the man said quietly. Sundar swallowed, his fingers trembling above the button. He could feel the weight of the woman's warning in his chest. Don't press it. They lied to you. But he also remembered the man's words. You cannot avoid the cost. Even doing nothing is a choice. He looked up at the man, searching his face for any hint of truth. What happens if I press it? he asked, his voice low. The man's smile widened just enough to reveal his teeth. You end what was never meant to be, he said. You erase what should never have existed. You bring balance. And if I don't? Sundar pressed. The man's smile did not falter. Then the imbalance continues. Chaos grows. You will see it with your own eyes. The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. Sundar's mind raced. Everything in him wanted to believe the woman, but some part of him, the part trained to lead, to act, to bear the weight of impossible decisions, wondered if the man was right. He thought of his team again, their faces around that table, their voices saying they believed in him, that they would stand with him no matter what. He thought of the woman's eyes when she said, once you press it, you can't undo it. He thought of himself as a boy, barefoot in Chennai, staring up at the stars, dreaming only of building something that mattered. The clock struck midnight. The sound was sharp, final, and before he could think anymore, his hand came down, but not on the button. He closed his fingers around the box instead and lifted it, clutching it tightly to his chest. No, he said firmly, his voice echoing over the rooftop. The man's smile vanished. For the first time, his expression cracked, and something dark flickered in his eyes. You disappoint me, the man murmured. Sundar straightened his shoulders, feeling something fierce rise in his chest. He said, there's always a choice. This is mine. The wind howled louder now, as though the night itself were reacting to his decision. The man stared at him for a long moment, then nodded very slowly. So, be it, he said, and then, before Sundar could react, the man turned and walked toward the edge of the rooftop. But instead of opening the stairwell door, he stepped straight off the ledge and disappeared into the darkness below. Sundar rushed forward instinctively. But when he looked over the edge, there was nothing, no body, no movement, just the quiet glow of the city lights far below. He backed away slowly, his pulse pounding in his ears. But before he could catch his breath, a new sound came, a faint whisper, not carried by the wind, but rising from somewhere deeper. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then the whisper grew louder, clearer, as though 100 voices were speaking at once. You should have pressed it. He spun around, scanning the shadows. The box in his hands felt heavier, warmer now, almost alive. The voices grew louder, surrounding him. You don't understand what you've done. You've doomed them all. The lights of the city below began to flicker, one by one, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Sundar stumbled back, clutching the box tighter, his knuckles white. Stop, he said aloud, though his voice was swallowed by the whispers. I made my choice. Leave me alone. But the whispers only laughed, a cold, hollow sound, and then the rooftop lights went out completely. He stood in total darkness now. The city below, a patchwork of failing lights and creeping shadows. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though something enormous was pressing down on him from above. He took a shaky step backward, and his foot struck something soft. He looked down and saw her. The woman. She was lying on the ground near the stairwell door, her cloak spread around her like a pool of ink. Her eyes were open but glassy, and her lips moved faintly, forming words he couldn't hear. He dropped to his knees beside her, placing the box carefully on the ground. What happened? He whispered. Who did this to you? She coughed, weakly, her breath shallow. You have to run, she managed to say. I'm not leaving you. He insisted. She shook her head, her hand finding his wrist. You don't understand? She said, her voice a fragile thread. It doesn't stop here. The choice, it follows you. You carry it. Forever. Her grip tightened suddenly, surprising him with its strength. They're coming, she whispered. And when they do, don't believe what they tell you. Don't. Her voice trailed off, her hand falling limp. Sundar sat back on his heels, staring at her still form, the weight of her words settling like a stone in his chest. He looked around the rooftop again, but the whispers had faded. The wind was still, now, and the city below seemed to hold its breath. He picked up the box again and rose slowly. His legs heavy. The stairwell door creaked open behind him, and a faint golden light spilled out from within. Instinct told him to run, but his feet stayed rooted from the doorway. A figure emerged, not the man in the suit, not the woman, but someone else. Taller, broader, dressed in a long coat that shimmered faintly in the light. The figure stopped, just inside the door, and spoke, its voice low but commanding. "You've made your choice," it said, "and now you must live with it." Sundar tightened his grip on the box, his knuckles white. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure tilted its head slightly, as though amused. "We are the consequence," it said simply. Then it stepped fully onto the rooftop. As Sundar finally saw its face and froze, because the face was his own eyes, his own mouth, his own quiet, weary expression, staring back at him from the figure's shadowed face. He stumbled backward, shaking his head. "No," he whispered. "This isn't real. You're not me." But the figure only smiled faintly, its eyes glinting. "You've always been us," it said. "You just didn't want to see it." The wind picked up again, swirling around them in a rising storm. The figure began to step closer, each footfall sending a faint echo through the concrete. "You made your choice," it repeated. "Now we finish what you started." And as it reached out toward him, the city lights below all went dark at once, plunging everything into silence and shadow. The truth rooftop was silent now, as though the world itself had stopped breathing. The lights of the city below lay in total darkness, the streets swallowed by shadow. Sundar stood motionless, clutching the box to his chest, his eyes fixed on the figure in front of him, his own face staring back at him from the shimmering figure in the long coat. The wind cut across the rooftop in sharp, cold bursts, lifting strands of his hair and carrying with it the faint sound of something that was not quite a whisper, not quite a scream. The figure stepped closer, and with each step, the air around it seemed to grow heavier. Thick with a presence Sundar could almost feel pressing against his skin. "You are afraid," the figure said in a voice that was exactly his own, though deeper somehow, weighted with something ancient and final. "You are afraid because you see what you truly are?" Sundar shook his head slowly, backing away, his breath catching in his throat. "You're not real," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not me." But the figure only smiled faintly, mirroring the same tired, gentle smile he had seen in the mirror countless mornings before. "We are everything you chose to forget," it said. "We are the cost of every decision you made to climb higher. Every name you forgot, every silence you ignored. You pressed the button long before tonight. You just never saw it." The words sank into him like stones, heavy and undeniable. He thought of all the years, the quiet compromises, the moments when he looked away, the faces of people he could no longer remember, but who had once trusted him to stand for them. "This isn't fair," he said, though his voice cracked as he spoke. I didn't know this was the price." The figure tilted its head slightly, its dark eyes never leaving his. "Ignorance," it said softly, "does not absolve you." Sundar's knees weakened and he sank to the ground, the box slipping from his hands and landing with a dull, final sound against the concrete. The glow of the button faded slowly until it was nothing more than a cold, lifeless piece of metal. He buried his face in his hands, the wind still rushing past him, carrying with it faint echoes of laughter and tears, like memories long buried, but not forgotten. Then something unexpected. A warm hand rested lightly on his shoulder. He froze, then looked up. She was there, the woman from the stairwell, her hood pulled back now, her face open and full of quiet strength. Her dark hair moved gently in the wind, and though her eyes carried the same sadness as before, there was also something else in them now. Compassion. "It's not too late," she said softly. He shook his head, his voice breaking. "I already chose. I already failed." "No," she said, kneeling down so their eyes met. "You only fail if you stop here. You can still stand up. You can still face them." He stared at her, the weight of her words fighting with the hollow ache in his chest. "What happens if I do?" he asked, his voice barely audible, her lips curved into a faint, almost bittersweet smile. Then you become the man you were meant to be, she said simply. She extended her hand. For a long moment, Sundar hesitated. The wind roared around them, the shadows deepened, and the figure that wore his face stood silent, watching. Then slowly, uncertainly, he reached out and took her hand. The moment their palms touched, a surge of warmth ran through him, so powerful it left him gasping. The shadows seemed to falter, the darkness pulling back just slightly. The rooftop lights flickered one by one until a faint golden glow returned to the city below, topped the figure with his face tilted its head, and for the first time, its expression softened. You have chosen, it said quietly, almost approvingly. Then it began to dissolve, its edges blurring into mist, its form breaking apart until nothing was left but the sound of the wind and the faint shimmer of light in the air where it had stood. Sundar stumbled to his feet, the woman steadying him. The box lay at his feet now, no longer glowing. He bent down, picked it up, and handed it to her. She nodded once and tucked it beneath her cloak. You've already paid enough, she said gently. You don't need to carry this anymore. He stared at her, feeling the weight in his chest lift, though faintly, as though for the first time in years he could breathe fully. Who are you really? He asked. She smiled faintly, her eyes catching the golden light from the city below. Someone who made the same mistake you almost made, she said. Someone who decided not to let it define them. The rooftop felt warmer now, the shadows retreating. Sundar looked out over the city, the lights returning, the streets below alive again with quiet motion. He could hear car horns, the faint murmur of voices, life continuing. He turned back to the woman. But she was already walking toward the stairwell, her cloak trailing behind her like a dark ribbon. What happens now? He called after her. She paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. Now, she said, you remember who you are, and you make it mean something? Then she disappeared down the stairwell, leaving him alone on the rooftop dot for a long time. Sundar stood there, the wind moving gently around him, the city lights reflected in his eyes. He thought of his team, of his family, of the boy he used to be, barefoot and full of dreams, Dot. And for the first time in a long while, he felt those dreams stirring again. He turned toward the stairwell and began to walk, his steps slow but steady, each one carrying him closer to whatever came next. Dot. As he reached the door, he glanced back once more at the rooftop, at the place where the figure with his face had stood, and whispered softly to himself, I will not be afraid anymore. And then he stepped inside, letting the door close gently behind him. The wind outside quieted. The city lights glowed, and far below, the world kept turning, waiting to see what he would choose next. Asterisk.